Did you know that when you listen to music on headphones, like say these, a lot of the bass you think you're hearing doesn't actually exist? That's right, your brain is just making it all up. Sound crazy? Well, strap in, because things are about to get weird. In this video, I'm going to show you how some of that awesome bass is actually imaginary. So all that amazing bass wasn't actually there. Why we love it so much was making me feel excitement. How to set up the sound on a synth. And just listen to the sound around this point. And exactly how to perform it for maximum emotional impact. Bring more drama to the song, really give it more authority. Way back in October 1980, I had just started at a new school in London, England. I was only 11, and up till then my musical world had pretty much revolved around two bands, the Beatles and ABBA. Walking into that new school was a bit of a culture shock. For one thing, there were well over 1,000 kids. I'd come from a small town elementary school with maybe 200 children, where my mum was a teacher. But the main cultural difference was the music. At my elementary school, the only interactions I remember with other kids were around growing my collection of red and blue Star Wars trading cards. Whereas at my new school, from the word go, we were constantly talking about bands and listening to music. So much music. Every opportunity, before school, during breaks, over lunch, after school, it was all we talked about. In October 1980, the biggest band in the UK was The Police, who had just released this album, Señora Mondada, which went straight in at number one at the same time as its first single, Don't Stand So Close to Me, was also number one. Now, nowadays, we all know that song as a global mega hit and Sting as a global megastar. He was in the charts again at the back end of last year, 2024, recycling an old Police riff on a Snoop Dogg track. But back then, in 1980, the Police and Sting were only just emerging as a dominant force in pop music, so the music was still very fresh and very exciting. Don't Stand So Close to Me was all over UK radio, including morning radio, and weekly music TV programs like Top of the Pops. And we all knew the song and the hook. But the first time I heard the complete song was as the opening track to the album. And I got a surprise. You see, Sting doesn't actually sing a word for the first 36 seconds. That's quite a long time. And as it turns out, it's far too long for radio and TV, which want to grab attention as quickly as possible and pack songs into a limited time period. So guess what they did? They cropped up the beginning. When they played Don't Stand So Close to Me, they started the song either just as Sting's vocal came in, or if they were feeling generous, maybe 10 seconds before, and lost the opening music. And that didn't ruin the song, and it certainly didn't have any impact on the hook. But it did mean that I hadn't heard the beginning, which sort of sets up the whole track. And as it turned out, that beginning, the bit that was too boring for radio and TV, was my favourite part. Why? Well, let's turn out the lights. Don't Stand So Close to Me actually starts with just a single low bass drone note. There's a short burst of 7 notes. A distant rhythm starts, so quiet you almost miss it. Finally, the drums start, and the bass moves and cycles. And then, only then, after 36 full seconds, does Sting's vocals start. It occurs to me now that this opening, certainly the first 20 seconds before the drums, is actually quite a lot like film music. The bass drone was played by Sting on a special synthesizer called a Moog Taurus, which he operated with foot pedals like a church organ. And there's something in the sound, or the way he plays it, with just a long, continuous note, that's very cinematic in the way it builds tension. Now, as an 11-year-old, I'd bought the record, but I'd also taped it, and I used to turn the lights off and listen to it over and over on headphones. I would try and block out all of my other senses and just concentrate on the sound. And the more I concentrated, the more exciting and awesome it sounded. Well, turns out there's some science to back this up. Low frequency sound waves, like bass, create vibrations that you can feel in your body, especially during live music or near a subwoofer, because they move more air than higher frequencies. These frequencies go in through our ears, into the cochlea in our inner ear, which translates them into signals that the brain interprets. Now, research shows that music can activate the brain's emotional center, called the limbic system, and in particular the amygdala, which processes emotions like fear, excitement, or pleasure. Bass-heavy music is often associated with intense emotional and physiological responses like excitement and awe. So listening to Sting's bass drone on headphones in the dark was literally triggering a powerful emotional response in me. The sound was making me feel excitement and awe. In terms of brain chemistry, it was quite literally awesome. But this is where it gets weird. I was listening on tiny headphones back in 1980. Headphones that literally couldn't produce any bass. The speakers just weren't big enough or powerful enough. So all that amazing bass I was hearing that I loved so much wasn't actually there. So if it wasn't there, then what on earth was I actually hearing? Well, let me start by explaining what I mean when I say that tiny headphones can't produce any bass. Let's go into the lab. For this experiment, I'm going to use something called pink noise, which is very good for testing audio equipment because it distributes power equally across all octaves. This is what it sounds like. It's quite relaxing at low volumes and sounds a bit like distant ocean waves. Okay, so I'm going to play that pink noise through my various speakers and listen using this special microphone that's designed for testing audio and doing analysis. Let's start with my main studio speakers. They've actually got two speakers, a 6.5-inch woofer and a 1-inch tweeter. Let's listen to each of them. So the woofer is taking care of the lower and middle frequencies, and the tweeter is taking care of the upper sounds. And when you add those together, you get pretty much the whole sound. It's not perfect because they're not perfect speakers. And there's a slight dip at what's called the crossover point, where the woofer stops and the tweeter takes over. But that's pretty much the same as the pink noise that we fed into it. Okay, well now let's try my second studio speaker, which is this mix cube. They've only got the one speaker and they're deliberately designed to sound like old-fashioned car stereo. They're very common in recording studios and are used to check what a song will sound like on a bad stereo system. In many ways, they're actually designed to sound bad. Note that the single speaker, which is 5.25 inches, is over an inch smaller than the 6.5-inch woofer in the main studio speakers. And a small speaker means less power, and less bass. So let's see what we get. And what you can see is that there's plenty of mid-range sound, not a lot of low bass, and not an awful lot of very high frequencies either. This is exactly what I would expect to find. So now let's finally try some small earbud headphones. Now these are fresh out of the box and are not damaged in any way. I'm also plugging them in directly using a wire. Note that the speaker in these is only a few millimeters wide. And remember what I said about smaller speakers producing less power and less bass? Well, let's see what we get. Wow. Basically, you've got frequencies that are the most important for intelligibility covered, but then the response falls off a cliff either side of that. Let me explain this a bit. This frequency here is 42 Hertz, which is the lowest note on a standard bass guitar. And that is about a 97% drop off in perceived volume. But if I jam these into my ears, I can certainly hear bass, especially if I put on these tiny rubber tips. So what's going on? Well, a couple of things. First, these tiny rubber tips do actually help quite a bit. By coupling the headphone to my ear canal, they improve the bass response and allow the headphones to perform noticeably better, especially in the 100 to 200 Hertz range, depending on the design. But even that's still only the middle string on an acoustic guitar, and nearly 2 octaves above a true low bass note. Back in the 80s, with no rubber tips and me just cramming the earbuds into my ears till they got cut and bled, I probably didn't get much below 200 to 300 Hertz. So that brings me to the second, more important thing that's happening. Witchcraft. Sorry, science. Science. Okay, here comes the science bit. I'll keep it light, but stick with me. It's fascinating. Let's start with a middle E. Okay, there's the E, but hang on. What are all those other notes? Another E, a B, yet another E, a G sharp, loads of other notes getting quieter going on into the distance. Well, those other notes are called harmonics, and it's the combination of those at different volumes with the original note that gives the sound its unique character or timbre. So what happens if we take them away? We're left with more or less a sine wave. And it's this single note called the fundamental frequency that's the note we hear and perceive as humans even when the harmonics are added back. We don't hear a megachord of E, another E, a B, a third E, a G sharp, and so on. We just hear the E, the fundamental frequency. Those harmonics follow a predictable mathematical pattern that our brains understand. If the harmonics of a bass note are strong enough, our brain can reconstruct the original note even if that fundamental is inaudible. And I can still hear the awesome opening bass drone on Don't Stand So Close to Me on tiny plastic headphones in the 80s. A couple of years before, I was listening to Don't Stand So Close to Me on Zenyatta Mandala, and 6,000 miles away in Japan, a man called Masaru Ibuka had a problem. He wanted to listen to music when he traveled without disturbing other people. Legend has it that there was a presentation made to Sony executives which contained only a single picture, a young man playing music on a huge, bulky tape recorder that he carried on his shoulders. Music, Ibuka said, needed to be portable and personal. And in 1979, the first version of the TPS-L2, or tape player stereo was introduced to an unsuspecting world of music listeners. We know it by its other, more popular name, the Sony Walkman. Initially, it was only available in Japan and cost about $600 in today's money, so not cheap at all. But Sony still sold 30,000 units in the first 2 months. The proposition for how we should listen to music was changing and would change. No longer would people only buy records and listen to them on speakers. They would carry their music around with them and listen privately, new environments not possible before, on public transport, on a plane, on rollerblades, running. By the mid-1980s, my school principal gave a speech to the whole school telling them about the dangers of crossing the road while wearing a Sony Walkman. But music culture and music consumption had changed. And this meant one thing: headphones. Over the coming decades, music consumption would slowly but surely shift from speakers on bookshelves into speakers we wore around our heads. Meanwhile, that drone bass sound I loved so much was becoming mainstream. In 1992, a rising electronic artist called Aphex Twin released Didgeridoo, a hypnotic 7-minute track built around relentless rhythms and a single droning bass note. The track became a standout example of how drone sounds were shaping the electronic scene, and by the late 90s, albums like Massive Attack's Mezzanine in 1998 took that sound to new levels. The most famous track, Angel, has become so widely used in TV shows, films, and commercials, it's practically a pop culture cliche. So let's think about this for a moment. At the same time that low sustained bass was becoming more popular, playback systems were moving towards headphones that had a much harder time playing it. Something had to be done. Well, around that time, an audio engineer called Mir Shashua had a really interesting thought. We knew that our brains filled in missing fundamental bass notes from harmonics. What if harmonics could be exaggerated or even artificially created from scratch? Would that help us hear bass on tiny speakers? This was groundbreaking. While Mr. Shashua and his company Waves patented one of the early methods for this idea, it paved the way for techniques that are now standard in nearly every modern audio device, and are used all the time by modern producers to ensure bass lines and kick drums punch through, even on tiny speakers or earbuds. It's why music has never sounded better on headphones like these, and why even a tiny Bluetooth speaker can actually sound pretty good, or at least much better than a speaker that size would have sounded in the 1980s. So when I play audio from, say, my phone into headphones, software nowadays is reinforcing the bass, not just by turning it up, but by exaggerating the harmonics and letting my brain do the rest. Imaginary bass. Never has absolutely nothing sounded so good. I told you it was witchcraft. I'll show you how to make this bass drone sound using my Model D, which is a clone of the Moog. So it's going to sound really good. It can sound quite a lot like the Moog Taurus if I want it to. You can really do it on any synth though. Ideally one with 2 oscillators, although even if you've got 1 oscillator and a filter, you can still get it to work. Now for this, I'm going to start by just opening the filter up all the way. I'll turn on the first oscillator, set it to a sawtooth wave, not a square. I find sawtooths are much better waveforms for this kind of drone bass. They've got more harmonics. I do use pulse and square waves for other kind of basses, but for this, I always use sawtooth. And the Moog Taurus was a couple of sawtooth waves as well. So filter all the way open, no resonance. And no filter envelope either, taking all the filter envelope off it, because I'm going to play the filter with my hand. And as far as the amp envelope is concerned, for this kind of thing, no attack, no decay, no release, just sustain. So I think this should be okay. Tiny little bit of keyboard tracking. That is the sound of a Moog sawtooth wave. And as I close the filter, you get that very nice sweep. And just listen to the sound around this point, just before the filter starts to buzz. And that's really where all of the emotion in the sound is. It's just around there. It's very, very, very powerful. So the way that you play this kind of bass part is you ride the filter to get your emotion. You know, you can get aggressive like that, or sort of brooding like this. You just have to listen to the music and play it in. Oh, I could do exactly the same thing on the Pro 1. I could even use the DeepMind. Now the DeepMind won't be quite as good because it's a digitally controlled oscillator, whereas these two are voltage controlled, and I like the way that VCO's, the tuning isn't perfect and it can drift a little bit. But the essence of the sound is just this. That's not the Don't Stand So Close to Me sound, by the way. I'll show you what that is in just a moment. So often when I do my drone bass parts, I actually use just a single sawtooth wave. Now, the next thing we're going to try is two waveforms. You can get this on the Taurus, where you can get the first one on the Taurus. That just wasn't the Don't Stand So Close to Me sound. But for this, what I'm going to do is I'll turn that oscillator on, move it to sawtooth, and I'm going to bring it up. So they're really not in tune. Now, as you tune them, you go through quite a wide chorusing sound, like this. And you want to get that slow, almost flanged sweep. There you go. And that's very nice. The final thing I'll try, which is what I really associate with the Taurus, is one of them set to 32 feet and the other one set to 16. So they're actually an octave apart. Now, the way the Taurus worked is you could balance between the octaves. But I have them more or less set the same volume. And that basically is the Don't Stand So Close to Me sound. So it's two sawtooth waveforms, an octave apart, pretty much at equal volume. And then no resonance, and then just the filter played. And what would have happened on the Taurus is there would have been a bit of release, because you've got to use foot pedals and you can't have it going. You need just a bit of release to carry you over. So the kind of simple techniques I use with a part like this are, maybe I'll bring it up from absolutely nothing, find the bite points, that's sort of the drama point, that's the first buzz point, then we're getting more aggressive, and now we're getting to really fully aggressive. And I will use that throughout a song, always doing it live, always doing a live take to just bring more drama to the song, bring more weight to it, make it more intense, and make it more sort of awesome and really give it more authority. So the best way of me showing you this, I think, is to actually perform a part like this live. I'm going to use a backing from a track that I produced last year. So unusually for one of my videos, this is me playing live to a backing. But I do it live so you can see all of the moves and exactly how I play the part. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.